Well, I'm Joshua Johnsen, and I'm a member of the Grants Pass Remembrance Coalition. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Taylor Stewart. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Oregon Remembrance Project. I help communities in Oregon with truth and reconciliation projects about repairing historical injustice. And so that's what brings me here to Grants Pass to talk about Grants Pass's history as a sundown town.
All right. So tell us a bit about how you got into this work.
So, for 3 years, I worked with the community of Coos Bay, Oregon to memorialize a man named Alonzo Tucker, Oregon's most widely documented African-American victim of lynching. Alonzo Tucker was 28, married, and a boxer from California. He was lynched in Coos Bay in 1902 after being wrongfully accused of sexually assaulting a white woman before he was eventually hung from a light pole on the old Marshfield Bridge in front of a crowd of 300. Even children were a part of the lynch mob that left Alonzo Tucker's body hanging there for several hours. Despite this all occurring in broad daylight without a masked man in the crowd, no one would ever be held accountable for this killing. Alonzo Tucker was just one of the thousands of African Americans who were lynched in this country. I do this work because I believe that while we can't change the past, we can always change our relationship to it, and that we have the power to write new endings to stories of historical injustice. And so, in 2020, I worked with the community of Coos Bay to hold a soil collection ceremony near the spot of the lynching, where we collected 2 jars of soil, with each bit of soil representing part of Alonzo Tucker's story. One jar was sent back to a museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and the other has been turned into an exhibit at the Coos History Museum. June 2021, we unveiled a historical marker in the community to memorialize Alonzo Tucker in the geographic memory of the community. I like to say that the historical marker was more than just a retelling of history. It was also the making of history, as over 600 people, double that who were at the 1902 lynching, gathered at the unveiling ceremony to add this new chapter to Alonzo Tucker's story. There are 2 dates of significance on the historical marker: 1902 when the lynching occurred, and 2021 when the historical marker was unveiled, and we can't fully understand the story of Alonzo Tucker only focusing on the 1902 date, as his story now continues on into 2020 and 2021 when that same community where his lynching occurred used his memory as inspiration for becoming a community more committed to the ideals of truth, justice, and reconciliation. We did this historical marker unveiling as part of Coos Bay's first ever Juneteenth celebration. And this past year in 2022, Coos Bay's Juneteenth celebration grew into a 3-day event where they honored another historical marker that they helped put up, and then had 2 days showcasing the local African American culture and history and tradition, allowing African Americans in their community and the surrounding area to be a part of this celebration and lead their community in this event honoring the day of Juneteenth. And so this is what brings me to Grants Pass, to be able to inspire within community-led justice projects, creating more diverse historical memories, and creating a unifying opportunity for a community to come together and rewrite the ending to a story of historical injustice. And so I believe that similarly to the way that we rewrote the ending to Alonzo Tucker's story, we can rewrite the ending to the story of a sundown town in Grants Pass.
That is fantastic to hear about your story, helping Coos Bay to remember Alonzo Tucker's story and to put another chapter, as you said, to kind of add to that story. How did you first hear about Alonzo Tucker?
You know, this all started with a trip I took to the American South after college. We went to Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And in Montgomery, the organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, headed up by Brian Stevenson, a lawyer, opened up a museum called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which was essentially a memorial to the thousands of African Americans who were lynched in this country. The Equal Justice Initiative has documented nearly 6,500 lynchings of African Americans between the years of 1865 to 1950. When you enter the museum, you're met with these 6-foot-high pillars that have the name of the state, the name of the county, and then the names of everyone who was lynched in that county. This was an extremely powerful experience for me to take what had always felt like this abstract history, but to have it personalized with names of people who were lynched in this country, especially seeing names with the last name Stewart, knowing that it was simply just time and place that separated me from the name on that pillar. And so I couldn't believe that I had to go to Montgomery, Alabama, just to learn that there had been at least one widely documented lynching of an African American here in Oregon. I lived in Portland and Oregon my entire life, and I couldn't believe that this story wasn't a part of our memory here in the state. And so I came away from that museum wanting to share this history with others. Luckily, the Equal Justice Initiative started what was called the Community Remembrance Project to work in these communities where the lynchings of African Americans took place to find healing and reconciliation through a sober reflection on history. Originally, there was an interest form online about getting involved in this project, and I would love to say that I immediately signed up with all the enthusiasm in the world, but that wouldn't be true because, in fact, I was too nervous to fill out the interest form. After all, I was a recent college grad with zero relevant experience, and I ultimately figured to myself, who am I to really think that I could be of any help? So I decided that I wasn't going to fill out the interest form. However, two experiences from the rest of my trip in the South inspired me to change my mind. The first was a quote from John Lewis, longtime civil rights icon and congressman from Georgia, who asked, "If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" I don't remember where I was when I first saw this quote, but I remember reading it and being like, ooh. I was like, are you talking to me, John? I was like, I'll think about it. And then when we were in Mississippi, my favorite experience was going to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, because there they didn't focus on the stories of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, the individuals who we kind of deify and are hard to relate to. Instead, the museum was intentional about telling the stories of everyday Mississippians who did their part to pave the way for justice. And so, there at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum is where I learned that you don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things. And so, those two encounters gave me the courage to reach out to the Equal Justice Initiative, and 4 years later, here we are. By simply asking that question, how do you reconcile lynching, and being willing to search for an answer, this work has taught me that there are 3 R words within this idea of reconciliation: remembrance, repair, and redemption. And then in order for us to get to that last R word of redemption, we need to have the courage it takes to undertake the first 2. And so I believe that there is a more just Oregon waiting for us as long as we have the courage it takes to get there.
That's incredible. I'm curious. I don't remember if you've shared in the past with me, but what made you go on that trip that's been so pivotal and really setting a course for your work today?
You know, it's one of those things I look back and it was complete chance. I went to the University of Portland, and I was in one of the academic buildings and just happened to see a flyer for this thing called the Civil Rights Immersion. And I thought to myself, hey, civil rights, that's something I'm into now. Maybe I should go on this trip. And so it was merely just curiosity, random chance, and I thought I was going on a simple sightseeing trip. Never in a million years would I have thought that trip would completely alter the trajectory of my life. And so I think back and I wish I could thank whoever put up those flyers around campus. I was like, you probably didn't realize it, but you were going to change my life. And so, it really was just this chance occurrence. And I do think it is those moments in our life that we can appreciate. And, I do feel some sort of divine intervention in the creation of this life plan. And I do feel that, unbeknownst to me, I was led to that trip to the South.
Right. So it's a sense of chance, but also maybe something else is kind of moving you along. You mentioned that the word civil rights kind of lit you up, that you felt that was something you were into. What was there something in college that kind of got, why did those words stand out to you and grab you on that poster?
Yeah, civil rights, racial justice, equity was not something that I paid attention to or even cared about for the vast majority of my life. One of the things is I graduated high school with the dream of becoming a tough on crime prosecutor. I always cared about justice, but what was lacking was my understanding of injustice. And that, at least when it comes to the criminal justice system, many times we can't find that justice we're looking for because there is no justice without equal justice. And so I had never cared about race. I grew up in a predominantly white environment in Beaverton, Oregon. And when you're a middle schooler, you don't want to believe that race is a salient factor because you don't want to be different from those around you. I have a black father and a white mother. And, growing up, I didn't think of, oh, this is my black dad and my white mom. They were simply my mom and my dad. And so I sort of lessened what I thought was the impact and the salience of race in America. And as I got older, I began to understand that this thing that I was taught that had ended in the 60s was actually still going on today. And the answer to the question I'd wondered my whole life of what would I have done had I been around during the civil rights era was, what was I doing right now? And so my senior year of college, I learned about Bryan Stevenson, the executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative.
He wrote that book, Just Mercy, right?
Yes, wrote
There's
the book,
a movie,
Just Mercy.
Right?
There's the movie with Michael B. Jordan, and it's about Bryan Stevenson. He's a lawyer from Montgomery, Alabama, who has primarily helped represent those who are on death row. And the book, Just Mercy, is about his efforts to free an innocent man who had been sentenced to die in the state of Alabama. And I remember it was my senior year. I was in a communication class and the professor showed Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk titled, "We Need to Talk About an Injustice." And I'll never forget sitting in that classroom thinking, I want to be like that guy. And so that's what sort of got me started on transitioning what I had wanted to do, because I had always cared about justice. And so that's what had made me want to be a prosecutor. And so from that experience, I transitioned to wanting to go into civil rights law because I wanted to be Bryan Stevenson and make this impact on justice, but just through a different lens. And so it was about that time that I was making that sort of transition in what I wanted to do in my career that I saw that flyer and was like, this is something I'm into now. And so if it weren't for that changing of priority, hearing about Brian Stevenson, those words, civil rights, wouldn't have jumped out to me like they did.
And it sounds like really digging into what the word justice, you get lit up for justice. And so looking deeper into that as kind of, would you agree with that? Kind of, it's you kind of, that's what I'm hearing. You're diving deeper into that word justice, and in a way that you didn't, as you grow older, you dive deeper into things anyway. And so this justice that lit you up when you're younger, diving a bit deeper, and here's where you find yourself right now.
Yeah. One of the things people ask me, what has changed? My sort of career path has changed drastically over the last 5 years. And, I've always cared about justice. I've just learned the best way for me to affect this cause. And so I spent my whole life wanting to be a lawyer. I went to law school for a day and a half. I started at Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, and on the first day there was a student panel at orientation, where into the panel the students were asked the question of what happens when topics of race, gender, sexuality, etc. come up in class. And as someone who wanted to do civil rights law, I was very invested in what did those conversations look like in law school. And to my great disappointment, the students were like, we don't talk about it. Even when we feel it's material to the case, our professors and our classmates don't want to have these conversations. This is something that you can pursue outside of class in student groups, but when it came to in-class discussion, not so much. And so I remember sitting there thinking to myself, well, I don't want to go to class then. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to have to pursue my whole reason for wanting to be law school on the side, as well as learn how to be a lawyer. And so I saw how frustrated these students were from banging their head up against a wall for 3 years, that essentially I was like, I don't want to be you in 3 years. And so the next day I told my advisor I was leaving, got in my car, and I was like, I just hit reset on my entire life.
Yeah.
And I drove home from Lewis and Clark wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. But fast forward 3 years, and instead of being a frustrated, newly appointed lawyer, I am living what, can really only be described as a dream. Yeah. I'm able to share the impact of this truth, justice, and reconciliation work with others, and to help spread the impact that this work has had in my life to affect other individuals and communities. And so I've learned a lot about justice. Most specifically is the way that injustice has evolved over the course of our history. And so in order to understand what necessitates the creation of a more just society today, I've really dove into the ways that injustice has evolved. And so that's what brings me to doing this historical reconciliation work, is to try and find a semblance of justice for the pain that those in the past have experienced. My hope is that by adding these new chapters to Alonzo Tucker's story, we can bring him this semblance of redemptive justice, this justice that redeems our pain, our wrongdoing, and our stories. And so that's what inspires me to do this work, is how can we bring those who have been harmed in the past some semblance of justice. And so this idea of historical justice, redemptive justice, has really come about through this last 4-year exploration on the topic.
Did Alonzo Tucker have is there any family that that are alive today?
Unfortunately, I have not been able to locate any current family. Looking on Ancestry, DNA,
right.
23andMe. And so, unfortunately, I have not been able to invite a present day relative to hear about the ways that we have honored Alonzo Tucker's experience. And so, I hope to, in heaven meet Alonzo Tucker one day and to be able to tell him about the ways that we've used his story to make changes to our society, so that his story doesn't end in a lynching, but his legacy continues, and that being a legacy of justice.
This seems like hard work. Like there's probably lots of challenges, and yet you've described it as you're like living in a dream. It's something you never thought you'd get to do, and you're getting to follow in the footsteps of some of your heroes, and also set precedent that ordinary people can. You have a phrase about ordinary people.
You don't have to be an extraordinary person to do extraordinary things.
So what keeps you going through this, what I imagine is a very, very dynamic and sometimes maybe emotionally, mentally challenging, relationally challenging work? What keeps you going?
It really is the ways that others carry on this work is that what inspires me. The work in Grants Pass, we've titled it the Sunrise Project, with the idea that sunrise is the opposite to sundown and signals the start of a new day. So as we try and go from sundown to sunrise, we're trying to develop this new identity as a sunrise community. And what I love to tell people is that I wish it was my idea to use the word sunrise, but that idea came from a 69-year-old white male truck driver from Grants Pass named Randolph. And so it's those little instances is what keeps me going. The ways that folks have been able to bring this truth, justice, and reconciliation into their own lives. There's a quote from New Jersey Senator Cory Booker that has been really impactful for me, and that's, don't let your inability to do everything stop you from doing one thing. And so to hear the stories of the ways that individuals have carried on this work and found their one thing that they can do is what inspires me. I gave a TED Talk with TEDx Portland back in May, and the highlight of this past week for me has been hearing from someone who attended the event, and they live in Portland in what's called the Coley neighborhood. And they're a part of a group that is planting 800 trees in the neighborhood. And they reached out to me as they're wanting to create, as part of this, a memorial grove to honor the memories of those who have advanced this racial justice work nationally as well as in our local communities here in Portland and Oregon. And so it's the little ways that people are taking up this work to engage in that remembrance, to engage in that repair so that we can bring our communities closer to redemption. And so it really is those I meet in this work that keep me going. And I have been significantly encouraged by those in Grants Pass. I feel that if I were to magically disappear one day, that the community of Grants Pass would still be advancing the community towards this idea of a sunrise community. And so when, retired individuals who never thought they would be a historian are digging up articles, looking into their local community history, and are finding these new passions in life, that's really what keeps me going, is that being able to experience the way that ordinary people can come together to do these extraordinary things.
So you got these the ordinary people at work that are inspiring you and kind of keep you going. Earlier you mentioned having a hero like Brian Stevenson. Did you get to meet him?
I did. So I have had two encounters with Brian Stevenson. One was in Martin Luther King Day in 2019. He came to a event in Portland at Beth Israel Synagogue, which is a synagogue in Northwest Portland. And when I found out that morning that Brian Stevenson was coming to town, I knew I had to clear my schedule. I was supposed to be somewhere else that night, but I was like, I have to go hear Brian Stevenson. And so I left home early with plenty of time, and I'm all excited about getting to the event early, getting a good seat, maybe being able to meet him. But instead, I ended up looking for parking for 30 to 40 minutes. I almost turned around. I was going to be late to the event, but in chance occurrence, I found a parking lot that was like a block away that I wish I had found 30 minutes earlier. And so by the time I get to the event, it is standing room only. All the pews are filled. There's a row of people. There's me, and then the door. And Brian gave his usual speech about how we need to be more proximate to the things that we want to change. But what stood out to me is what he said at the very end, and that was, when I come back to Portland, I want you to have gotten rid of your death penalty in Oregon. And so me in the very, very back thought, okay, Brian, I'll try my best. And so I was able to introduce Brian for a conference in 2021, and I was able to share that story about how I was able to take his message and then actually try to go about and doing that. And so I'm very involved in the Oregon campaign to end the death penalty. And so it was an honor to be able to meet Brian Stevenson, albeit short in a virtual capacity. When little Brian Stevenson Square appears on Zoom, you're like, Taylor, you can be a fan later. You've got 10 minutes with the man. You got to be cool, calm, and collected. And so it was great to meet my hero. And after I introduced him, someone from his organization reached out to me, and they're like, oh, if you would like to pass along a note to Brian, I'd be happy to do so. And I was like, okay, I got to once again clear my schedule. I was like, I have to write a note to Brian Stevenson. And so it was how do you tell someone the impact they've had in your life in one Word document? And so I was able to tell him, I was like, I have 3 life goals. 1, end the death penalty in Oregon. 2, open what I'm calling the Center for Reconciliation in Portland. And 3, do for someone what you've done for me. I don't know if I'll ever accomplish that last goal, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. And I ended the note with the idea that I hope the next time Brian feels discouraged or like he can't change the whole world, to remember he changed mine. And left it sincerely, Taylor Stewart. And I told him that when we end the death penalty in Oregon, you can come visit me. And so I hope that my path and Brian's will cross again in the future, and that we'll be able to host him in the state of Oregon and be able to tell him about the ways that his work has inspired what we're trying to do here in Oregon.
Well, I have to start getting ready to land our time together. 2 more kind of quick questions for you. 1, any other heroes that you want to name drop?
In addition to Brian Stevenson, the other most impactful individual in my life has been John Lewis. His quote of, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? Is what gave me that fierce urgency of now to start this work in Coos Bay. And when we did the historical marker unveiling, we did it on a Saturday, and I remember starting my work week on Monday, and this thing that I had been spending the last 3 years of my life trying to do was all of a sudden over. And I remember sitting at my desk, and I was kind of like, now what? Now what? I need a new path. I need a new project. And that week, John Lewis's quote of "getting good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America" kept going through my mind. And so that week, I sort of realized, and I was like, oh, that's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm doing next, is I'm out there trying to get in good trouble. And so John Lewis is the other individual who's been most impactful in inspiring the work that I do today.
That's good. And then if folks want to get in contact with you, they have questions, thoughts, they want to join in something that you're leading in or helping out with, what are some good ways for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to connect with me via the Oregon Remembrance Project, either the website or the social media accounts. And
So just kind of Google Oregon Remembrance Project will find
yes,
you. Okay.
And there are a variety of ways to get involved. If they live in the Grants Pass or Southern Oregon region, they can help us with the Sunrise Project. Or essentially, one of my favorite things is just to help people create this own sort of truth and reconciliation work in their own community. And so if folks are wanting to bring this type of work to their own community, I would be happy to talk with them and brainstorm what that kind of project could look like. But one of the best ways for people to get involved is to bring this process of reconciliation into their own life. What would it look like to model these ideals of remembrance, repair, and redemption in our interpersonal lives? I believe that a modeling of those 3 R words is what a sunrise community would look like, so that not that we prevent all harm from arising, but when harm does arise, we are intentional about rectifying that harm. And so practicing in our interpersonal lives what it looks like to remember, to understand, to honor the pain that was committed, to have the harm perpetrator to understand and be involved in that remembrance work so that they can then engage in meaningful and intentional repair, so that relationship can reach a place of redemption, a place of peace and justice. And so the modeling, the practice of those 3 R words is the easiest, simplest, and also most difficult way of getting involved, of how can we create this wider movement of more just relationships. And so my hope is that as people consider what it would look like to implement those 3 R's in their life, they'll have a similar exploration of this topic of justice in a similar way that I did. And so my hope is that folks take on this challenge and then reach out to me and tell me what this work has meant to their life, because that is what sustains me. That's what gives me inspiration and hope. And so I hope that as people implement this work in their own life, they'll connect with me and share this impact so that we can spread their story, and we can keep the fire that allows us to do this work and inspires us to keep going.
I love how you take that idea of justice and you have a vision for it community-wide, but then bringing it home and saying it doesn't matter a whole lot ultimately if it's not a practice that you're interested in pursuing in your own interpersonal relationships in your own life. So that's pretty inspirational there.
Yeah, my hope is that we can model this on an individual level so that our collective bodies can learn from the ways that we do this interpersonally, but also the way that we can hopefully learn as individuals from the way that we as a collective are trying to embody these 3 R words. And so, that's not to say I'm an expert at doing the 3 R's in my interpersonal life, but I really believe that so much of this is just taking that first step of saying, this is something that I want to do. What would it look like for me to be intentional? And so the creation of this sunrise community, I believe, is really just all about intentionality, creating more just communities for people of color, but also more just relationships for all of us.
Cool. Hey, Taylor Stewart, thank you for taking some time to share with us some of your story and inspire us to look more intentionally at our own lives. So thank you.
No, thank you, Josh. Thank you for welcoming me into the community. It's been a pleasure to come to Grants Pass, and I look forward to coming back on many more occasions. And I'm not just coming back for the In-N-Out burger. And so I look forward to getting the local flavors here in town.
Nice. Cool. Well, we'll see you later.